this is also a time of change for my family.
King Charles had prepared himself for tough conversations, family fights, and even public challenges to his power. But nothing could have prepared him for what landed on his desk that morning. Meghan had not simply asked to come back to royal work. She had officially demanded control over a special royal role that belonged only to Catherine, a role locked in by the late Queen, protected by royal tradition, and impossible to hand over to anyone outside the active royal family. But before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure you subscribe to Royal Zone so you never miss a single update. Charles was sitting with his private secretaries when the sealed document arrived. He was expecting a simple proposal, maybe a plan for charity cooperation, or something to ease old tensions. Instead, the very first page changed the mood in the room entirely. The Queen's Covenant for Children and Families, a protected royal patronage, meaning a charity role officially given by the King, was right at the center of Meghan's demand. She wanted temporary control of it, even though the role belonged to Catherine and could not be handed to anyone else without the King's direct approval. The King read the request once. Then he read it again. Meghan's argument did not sound like an offer to help. It described the covenant as needing a well-known woman who could take its work beyond Britain, language that was clearly suggesting Catherine was no longer strong enough to lead it into the future. Charles understood exactly why that was serious. The late Queen had given this patronage to the princess as a sign of trust, stability, and duty. William told Catherine the news in private. She listened without saying a word, but her calm expression shifted when William admitted that Meghan's letter had called the patronage vacant. Catherine repeated the word slowly. Vacant. The prince watched the pain quietly settle behind her steady face. Meghan had taken Catherine's reduced public schedule and used it as proof that she could be replaced. Charles felt a second shock when he looked more carefully at the words in the letter. Several phrases matched a restricted palace document, including a dormant transfer clause, which is a rarely used rule explaining how a royal role can be temporarily handed to someone else during a royal absence. That kind of material was never meant to leave palace walls. Someone with deep knowledge of royal records had helped Meghan build her case. This was no longer just a family member being ambitious. It was an organized challenge to royal authority. When the secretaries left the room, Charles removed his glasses and pressed his fingers to his forehead. "She has crossed the boundary," he whispered. "The one she was warned never to approach." Before he could even respond to the letter, William requested an urgent private meeting. The future king arrived tense, carrying no papers, but he was certain about who had given Meghan access to that restricted royal language. What had started as a bold request was now turning into something far more dangerous. A battle over Catherine's dignity, Meghan's unfinished royal ambitions, and Charles's ability to protect his own family. Behind the formal title of the patronage stood three people, each carrying very different wounds. Catherine saw it as a sacred promise made in the final years of Queen Elizabeth's life. Meghan saw it as proof that the palace had always denied her the platform she deserved. And Charles saw both women standing on opposite sides of a family crack he had never managed to fully heal. Now one protected royal role was about to expose every resentment they had all tried to bury. Catherine had earned the Queen's Covenant through years of focused work on children, stable families, and early childhood development. The patronage was a royal charity role carried in the monarch's name, but the late Queen had never treated it as just a decorative title. In a private written instruction, she described it as a lifelong duty and placed its future directly in Catherine's hands. Meghan carried a very different memory. She had once expected to lead a major Commonwealth initiative, a charity program connected to countries with historic ties to the crown. After she left royal duties, she became convinced that opportunities meant for her had quietly been redirected toward Catherine. During a tense conversation with Harry, She insisted her new demand was not an attack. It was, she said, an attempt to reclaim work she had always been qualified to do. Catherine felt this timing more deeply than the demand itself. She had been slowly rebuilding her strength, returning carefully to public life while the entire country watched her every step. And Meghan had chosen that vulnerable moment to describe the role as needing stronger leadership. To the princess, that was not just ambition. That was an attempt to turn her suffering into weakness. William carried the hidden answer directly to Charles. The Queen's personal covenant allowed another working royal to offer temporary support, but neither the name nor the authority of the patronage could be transferred while Catherine was still in service. The prince told his father this was not a flexible tradition. It was a direct promise, written specifically to prevent exactly this kind of power struggle. Camilla saw a different danger. She warned Charles that a quick refusal could easily be twisted into a public story about Meghan being blocked from helping vulnerable children. The Queen consort understood the trap clearly: approve the request and betray Catherine, or reject it and risk looking cruel. The king finally understood how carefully this claim had been designed. Catherine stood beside the cabinet, holding the covenant's original silver emblem. She did not touch it. She simply told William she would not fight Meghan in public for something the Queen had already placed in her care. The prince answered quietly. Catherine might not want a battle, but someone inside the old palace structure had already chosen one on her behalf. To understand how Meghan gained both the courage and the confidential knowledge to make such a demand, Charles would have to go back to one royal ceremony that everyone had tried to forget. The attempt to seize Catherine's patronage did not begin with the letter Charles received. It began months earlier, inside a crowded hall at St. James's Palace, when one empty chair became more powerful than any speech delivered that evening. Catherine was absent. Meghan was watching from far away, and an old royal advisor made one careless comment about temporary succession. That single sentence traveled across an ocean, entered the wrong conversation, and eventually returned to the king as a direct challenge. Princess Anne stepped forward that evening, because Catherine could not be there. She delivered brief remarks on the princess's behalf, but she never claimed the role itself. The annual covenant ceremony was the patronage's official gathering, where its charity work and future plans were presented to supporters. Catherine's empty chair remained untouched, a quiet signal that the position still belonged to her, even in her absence. Sir Malcolm Avery noticed that empty chair as well. The former palace advisor had helped write the covenant's early administrative rules, the private instructions controlling how the patronage could be supported or protected. After the ceremony, he spoke freely with several guests about what might happen if Catherine could not maintain a full public schedule. That conversation should have ended there. It did not. Avery told an American charity executive that a dormant continuity clause allowed the monarch to appoint a temporary steward, a rarely used rule designed to keep the charity's work moving during a royal absence. Days later, that executive repeated the detail during a private call with Meghan. She heard opportunity where others had simply heard procedure. Meghan focused on the empty chair. She argued that the palace was maintaining appearances while the patronage needed active leadership. To her, Catherine's absence proved the covenant needed someone ready to take it beyond Britain. Yet Catherine later learned that photographs of that empty chair had been circulating among Meghan's advisors. The princess felt something colder than anger. Her painful absence had been studied as an opening. William uncovered the deeper plan. One of Meghan's legal consultants had contacted Avery 3 separate times after the ceremony, asking for details about the covenant's status, its finances, and its royal emblem. The prince also discovered what Meghan's submission had quietly hidden. Any temporary steward was required to be a senior working royal acting under Catherine's authority. Meghan's team had simply removed that restriction from their argument entirely. Charles summoned Avery for a private meeting. The advisor arrived with a walking stick and admitted that his careless remark had opened the door. When he left, he forgot the stick beside the chair. The king stared at it in silence, realizing that one man's loose words had become another person's weapon. Charles ordered the request kept completely secret until he could speak to Meghan directly, but she was already in London, expecting a negotiation. By that point, secretaries and legal language were no longer enough. The confrontation had already begun. There were no cameras in the room, no public statements, no smiling relatives positioned between them. Only Charles, Meghan, and the protected name of the woman who was not yet present. The king entered intending to hear an explanation. Meghan arrived prepared to make a case. But within minutes, the conversation stopped sounding like a discussion about charity. It became a full reckoning over rejection, entitlement, loyalty, and the royal future. Both believed they were defending something rightfully theirs. Charles refused Meghan's request to bring advisors into the meeting. Clarence House was the king's London residence, and he wanted the matter handled as a family dispute before it hardened into an official royal crisis. Meghan accepted the condition, but she did not soften her argument. She said the covenant had been held back by caution, and that she could bring international donors, global partnerships, and attention that the palace had failed to secure. She spoke with controlled confidence. She insisted the work mattered more than tradition, and argued that children should not suffer simply because the royal family was afraid of change. Charles listened carefully, until he asked the one question she had been avoiding from the start. Why had Catherine not been consulted before the application was filed? Meghan answered without hesitation. She said permission was not required from the person whose inactivity had created the need for change in the first place. Charles pushed his chair back. The restraint disappeared from his voice. You are asking for what was never yours, and using Catherine's pain to justify taking it. The king reminded her that stepping back from public duties was not the same as giving up. Catherine had reduced her schedule to recover, not to abandon the promise placed in her care. Meghan then revealed the deeper belief driving her claim. During a private recorded conversation with Harry, months earlier, she had said that Queen Elizabeth once considered giving her a connected Commonwealth role. She now described the covenant request as a correction, a fix for an opportunity the institution had quietly denied her. Charles answered with a truth she had never expected to hear. The late Queen had considered several roles, but she had personally removed Meghan's name from the covenant's succession framework, which lists who could temporarily support or take over authority. This happened after concerns arose about mixing royal power with independent commercial interests. Meghan's expression changed. She asked whether Catherine had known. The door opened before Charles could respond. Catherine entered, with William, and answered that she had only found out that morning. The princess did not accuse Meghan of jealousy. She asked one quiet, direct question. Why had her work been described as abandoned, rather than temporarily reduced? Meghan could not answer without exposing the wound beneath the strategy. Charles ended the meeting with a final order. No decision would be issued until the covenant's authority had been reviewed by the two royals, empowered to interpret the late Queen's private instructions. Meghan had made her demand. Catherine had faced it, and the king now had to decide whether royal power belonged to pressure or to a promise made in silence. The final decision did not rest with public popularity, charitable ambition, or even Charles's personal sympathy. Hidden beneath the patronage's ceremonial language was a private instruction carrying the full moral authority of the late Queen. It named Catherine, defined the meaning of her stewardship, and warned future monarchs against allowing the role to become a prize in a family competition. When Charles finally heard those words read aloud, Meghan's request stopped looking ambitious. It looked dangerously calculated. Charles met Princess Anne and the keeper of the Privy Seal inside a quiet Windsor library. The keeper is the official responsible for protecting the monarch's most important formal documents and approvals. Anne had been present when Queen Elizabeth accepted the covenant's final private instructions, and she understood that the document was not symbolic. It was a direct command designed to survive changing reigns, family pressure, and personal ambition. She began reading aloud. The covenant had been designed to operate across decades, not around convenient public schedules. Illness, pregnancy, family responsibility, or fewer public appearances could never be treated as abandonment. Catherine's authority remained fully intact, because the role had been entrusted to her, not merely to her availability. Charles listened carefully, knowing that this single detail destroyed the entire central argument behind Meghan's claim. Charles then admitted what still troubled him. A harsh rejection might deepen Harry's separation from the family and push his younger son even further away. Anne did not dismiss that fear, but she asked whether protecting one damaged relationship was worth sacrificing Catherine's trust and ignoring their mother's final instructions. The king remembered promising to protect both of his sons' families. Yet staying neutral had not brought peace. It had allowed Catherine's quiet restraint to be seen as weakness, and had allowed Meghan's pressure to grow into a sense of entitlement. Charles now understood something clearly. Refusing to take a side was itself a choice, and Catherine had been paying the price for it. Anne then read the most decisive clause of all. The patronage could never pass to anyone who had already left official royal service, or who intended to combine royal authority with independent personal branding. She also revealed, through an official palace record, that Meghan's representatives had requested permission to use the covenant's royal seal on international fundraising materials, before the formal application had even reached Charles. The royal seal is the official emblem, proving that work is operating under the Crown's authority. Meghan's team had been preparing for victory before the king had even been asked. Charles stood near the window while Anne read the final paragraph. When she finished, he closed the curtains himself. "There will be no negotiation over my mother's promise," he said. Camilla found him alone afterward and asked whether he was prepared for the consequences. The monarch answered that a far greater danger would be teaching the family that pressure matters more than loyalty. Charles authorized the formal refusal, but before it could reach Meghan, a suspended palace contact leaked the decision. The king had drawn his line, yet that betrayal meant Meghan would not receive the rejection quietly and privately. She would experience it as a public humiliation waiting to explode. The refusal was only 6 paragraphs long, but its consequences spread through the royal household within minutes. Meghan's request was denied. Her access to the patronage's advisors was cut off. Every informal conversation connected to the covenant was frozen immediately. Yet the most painful sentence in the entire document was not legal or procedural. It simply stated that Catherine had never stopped holding the role. In one line, the palace rejected Meghan's argument and exposed the personal judgment quietly hidden beneath it. Charles's response confirmed that the Queen's covenant for children and families would remain permanently under Catherine's stewardship, meaning her formal duty to protect and lead the patronage in the monarch's name. The role was not vacant. It was not dormant. It was not available for temporary reassignment. Palace officials were ordered to end every discussion with Meghan's external team and to recover all fundraising drafts that carried unauthorized versions of the covenant's emblem. Meghan received the decision at her London residence. She read the final paragraph, placed her phone face down, and told Harry that the palace had chosen Catherine's image over children who needed global support. Her voice stayed controlled, but humiliation sat beneath every word. The rejection had not simply blocked her proposal. It had declared that her entire claim was built on a false judgment of another woman's weakness. Harry asked the question she had been hoping to avoid. Had she truly expected Charles to remove the patronage from Catherine? Meghan answered that she had expected the king to recognize capability. That reply exposed the real competition at the heart of the request. She had not seen herself as temporary support. She had seen this moment as a test of which woman deserved the greater royal platform. The fallout deepened almost immediately. A palace communications officer uncovered a prepared announcement already titled, "A New Global Chapter for the Queen's Covenant." The draft suggested Meghan's team had either expected approval or planned to create enough public pressure to make refusal very difficult. William then learned that a photographer had already been booked outside a children's center, where Meghan planned to make her first unofficial appearance linked to the role. Catherine received the restored covenant schedule from her private secretary. She closed the folder without celebrating, and asked that no palace statement be made attacking Meghan. Children, she said, could not be turned into props in a family struggle. The princess had regained control, but she refused to turn victory into revenge. Charles heard of Catherine's decision and fell completely silent. Her restraint moved him more deeply than any anger could have. In that moment, the king knew with certainty that the late queen had entrusted the patronage to exactly the right person. Then the crisis escaped the palace walls. Images of Meghan arriving in London appeared online, and questions spread rapidly about a meeting she was never supposed to disclose. The rejection had ended her claim on paper, but only a private conversation between Charles and Catherine could determine whether the damage would harden into permanent bitterness. Charles expected Catherine to demand stronger protection, a public correction, or real consequences for everyone who had helped Meghan. Instead, when the two met alone, without William, Camilla, secretaries, or legal advisors, the princess asked for something that surprised him even more than the original claim. She did not want revenge. She wanted the patronage protected from ever becoming a weapon again. That single request transformed the king's refusal from a temporary answer into a permanent royal settlement. Catherine arrived at Windsor alone and asked that no one join them. She did not want anger or palace strategy influencing what came next. The meeting mattered, because the dispute had already gone far beyond one rejected application. It had exposed how easily illness, reduced public duty, and private pain could be twisted into evidence that a royal promise had somehow expired. Charles apologized before she could even begin. He admitted that Meghan's application should never have advanced far enough to force Catherine into defending a role Queen Elizabeth had already secured for her. The monarch knew his own delay had created doubt where there should have been certainty, and that the princess had carried the emotional cost of that hesitation. Catherine then admitted what had hurt her most. Being described as inactive had reopened a fear she had never spoken aloud, that her reduced public presence had made the family see her as replaceable. Charles rejected that thought immediately. Vulnerability, he told her, had never erased years of service, loyalty, or the deep trust that had been placed in her. Catherine still refused to answer pain with cruelty. She told the king that Meghan's attempted takeover appeared to be driven by a desperate need to prove that leaving royal life had not reduced her importance. The princess felt genuine sadness for that need, even while fully recognizing the damage it had caused. Catherine asked for more than a refusal. She wanted the patronage charter rewritten so that no future monarch could ever interpret illness, pregnancy, family duty, or a temporary absence as abandonment. The charter is the formal document defining how the covenant must be governed. Protecting it would protect every future royal from the same kind of calculated challenge. Charles then revealed, through a private documented instruction, that he had considered removing Meghan's right to mention any historical connection to the covenant. Catherine urged him not to turn protection into personal punishment. "Defend the institution," she said, "but do not feed another public war." Charles reached across the table and took her hand. He told her that restraint must never again be mistaken for weakness. Then he signed the instruction, creating a permanent protective charter. As Catherine rose to leave, the king asked whether she could ever forgive Meghan. She answered that forgiveness might come privately over time, but trust could not be restored simply by pretending the betrayal had never happened. The revised charter was sent out for official announcement. At that exact same moment, a leaked copy of Meghan's rejected application reached a major television newsroom. Catherine had stopped justice from turning into vengeance, but the public was about to be far less restrained. By sunrise, the conflict Charles had fought to keep behind palace doors was dominating all of Britain. The language of Meghan's request, Catherine's supposed inactivity, the king's stunned response, moved from private royal correspondence to breakfast news broadcasts and busy streets. Yet the public reaction was not shaped by constitutional rules or legal clauses. It centered on one simple, powerful image: Catherine quietly returning to the work Meghan had tried to claim, without speaking a single hostile word. Palace officials confirmed that an unauthorized request involving a protected royal patronage had been rejected. A royal patronage is an official charity role carried on behalf of the crown, giving its holder influence, public visibility, and serious responsibility. The palace refused to publish Meghan's full submission or discuss the private family meeting, but that silence only made the debate more intense. Broadcasters framed the crisis as a direct test of royal duty. Were these appointments lifelong promises built through years of service, or powerful platforms that could simply be reassigned to whoever commanded greater international attention? The argument mattered deeply because Catherine's temporary reduction in public work had now been used to challenge whether loyalty still carried more weight than visibility. Meghan felt the humiliation grow with every headline. The coverage focused on her attempt to replace Catherine, not on the donors and global partnerships she had proposed. Harry urged her to release the complete application and defend her true motives. She refused. The most aggressive language in the document would reveal that her team had treated the princess not as someone needing support, but as an obstacle ready to be removed. Catherine felt no triumph. She told her staff not to celebrate approval ratings or treat public sympathy as a victory. The covenant, she insisted, had to return immediately to helping children and families. Her quiet restraint stood in painful contrast to the leaked draft of Meghan's launch announcement, which had described the patronage as entering more capable global hands. Charles answered that revelation with direct action. He authorized the publication of the revised charter, the formal rules controlling the covenant. It permanently named Catherine as principal steward and allowed temporary support only from working royals personally chosen by her. The attempted loophole was permanently closed. One newspaper captured the national mood with a front-page headline: "The patronage she could not take." Beneath it appeared two photographs side by side: Meghan entering Clarence House and Catherine greeting families at a children's center. Later that morning, a crowd gathered outside the center in South London. When Catherine arrived, the applause became so loud that she stopped, visibly moved, and placed one hand over her heart. Britain had delivered its judgment, but Charles knew that public emotion could not be the final word. As support gathered around Catherine, the king prepared one last statement, not to extend the scandal, but to end it with an unmistakable verdict. The world had seen the ambition, the pain, and the attempted seizure. Now the crown had to declare what it would remember, after all the noise had disappeared. Charles's final decision was not delivered in anger. It came without insults, retaliation, or dramatic punishment, but its meaning was absolute. Meghan would not receive Catherine's patronage. She would not represent it abroad. She would not use its royal identity for independent campaigns. The covenant would remain exactly where Queen Elizabeth placed it. In defending that promise, the king finally answered a question that had haunted the monarchy for years: whether pressure could overpower loyalty. This time, it could not. Charles issued a formal declaration confirming Catherine as the permanent principal steward of the Queen's covenant for children and families. The declaration was an official royal statement, carrying the full authority of the monarch. It confirmed that the princess would hold the role for as long as she remained part of the working royal household. No temporary absence could create a vacancy, and no replacement could be appointed without her direct agreement. Catherine returned to the Covenant's headquarters and met privately with the staff. She told them the role had never been about possession, status, or defeating another woman. It was about keeping a promise to the families who depended on stability. The princess had survived an attempt to turn her vulnerability into weakness, yet she refused to treat the outcome as a personal victory. Meghan left Britain without the announcement she had prepared. During a final recorded conversation with Harry, she admitted that she had underestimated how deeply the patronage was tied to Catherine, and how firmly Charles would defend the late Queen's choice. Harry heard no anger in her voice. He heard disappointment, but also the first sign that she understood the boundary had now become permanent. Charles ordered every unauthorized promotional draft destroyed. He also permanently closed the dormant continuity clause, the rarely used rule that had allowed Meghan's team to argue for temporary control. No future claimant would ever be able to use that loophole again. Sir Malcolm Avery was then removed from all advisory access to restricted patronage records, ending the internal channel that had made the entire strategy possible in the first place. Charles visited Catherine after her first full Covenant engagement. He did not mention Meghan, the leaked application, or the public backlash. He simply told the princess, "The promise is safe." Catherine answered, "Then the work can continue." That quiet exchange carried the final verdict. Meghan's failure did not prove that she lacked compassion or ability. It proved that royal service cannot be claimed through ambition, publicity, or comparison. It has to be earned through trust, continuity, and sustained duty. Charles emerged with firmer authority. Catherine emerged with strength and dignity. The monarchy finally enforced a boundary it had avoided for far too long. The attempted takeover was over. Meghan lost the claim. Catherine retained the patronage permanently, and the king proved that the crown's deepest promises are not available to whoever demands them most forcefully. Visibility can attract attention, but only loyalty earns the crown's trust. Royal Zone. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss a royal update. And don't forget to like this video. We will see you in the next one.